Her ex called her worthless. The Mafia boss dropped $2 million without saying a word. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a quick favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our channel's latest videos. It only takes a moment. It is completely free, and it is one of the best ways to support us as we continue bringing you more dramatic and emotional stories like this one. Your support truly means so much to us. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character and continue the story. The most dangerous lie you can ever believe is the one someone repeats until it sounds like your own voice. I have negotiated billion-dollar deals without raising my voice. I have watched powerful men lose everything because they underestimated the silence in the room. But nothing I had ever witnessed stayed with me like a single sentence spoken during a charity gala on a cold October evening in Manhattan. The ballroom inside the Hawthorne Grand Hotel glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected against polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the grand staircase while executives, celebrities, philanthropists, and politicians drifted between conversations holding glasses of sparkling water and expensive wine. Every smile looked practiced. Every handshake carried an invisible price. I attended because the foundation supported children across New York City, and despite what the newspapers enjoyed printing about me, I believed every child deserved a chance to grow up with more hope than fear. My name on the donor list guaranteed attention before I even entered the room. People nodded respectfully. Some smiled too quickly. Others carefully measured every word they spoke to me. I had grown accustomed to that. Power changed the way people looked at you long before they ever learned who you really were. I accepted a glass of mineral water from a passing server and quietly stepped away from the crowd toward one of the large windows overlooking the East River. From there, I preferred to observe instead of participate. Observation had protected me far more often than conversation ever had. That was when I noticed her. She moved through the ballroom carrying an empty serving tray with calm confidence. She thanked every guest who returned a glass. She smiled at elderly donors. She helped one volunteer straighten a crooked tablecloth without anyone asking. Nothing about her demanded attention, yet somehow she became the only person I could not stop watching. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply doing her job with quiet dignity. A few moments later, a man wearing a tailored navy suit crossed the ballroom toward her. He carried himself like someone accustomed to hearing yes before finishing a sentence. I recognized him after a second. Ethan Carter, a rising real estate developer whose face had appeared in several business magazines that year. His smile disappeared the instant he reached her. "Still working these events?" he asked loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. The young woman remained composed. "Good evening, Ethan. I thought you would have figured things out by now." She lowered her eyes for only a moment before meeting his stare again. "I have." He laughed, but there was no warmth behind it. "Really?" "Because from where I am standing, you are still pretending your life has meaning." Several conversations nearby began to fade as people sensed discomfort but chose not to interfere. I remained exactly where I was. Not because I approved of what I was hearing, but because I wanted to understand the people standing in front of me. Ethan leaned closer, speaking with the confidence of someone who believed nobody would challenge him. "Do you know what your problem has always been, Claire?" She answered quietly. "No, you never understood your value." He smiled cruelly before delivering the sentence that silenced even the musicians in my mind. "You are worthless." The room continued moving as though nothing had happened. Glasses clinked together. Soft music floated through the air. Waiters carried silver trays between elegantly dressed guests. Yet something invisible had shifted. I watched Claire take one slow breath before lifting the tray in her hands again. She did not argue. She did not cry. She did not beg him to take the words back. Instead, she thanked another guest for attending the fundraiser and continued serving the room with the same quiet grace she had shown only minutes earlier. That was the exact moment I realized the strongest person in the ballroom was not wearing the most expensive suit. Some people reveal their character the moment they believe there will be no consequences. I remained near the window long after Ethan walked away, watching Claire disappear into the rhythm of the evening as though nothing had happened. She collected empty glasses, greeted arriving guests with the same calm smile, and even stopped to help an elderly couple find their assigned table. If anyone had looked at her without witnessing those few painful minutes, they would have believed she had enjoyed a perfectly ordinary evening. That was what unsettled me the most. She was not pretending for attention. She was protecting everyone else from carrying the weight of her own hurt. I had spent years learning to recognize masks. This was not one. It was quiet resilience. I set my untouched glass on a nearby table and continued observing the ballroom. Conversations gradually returned to normal. Laughter floated beneath the crystal chandeliers once again. The uncomfortable moment had already become yesterday's news for nearly everyone in the room. That is the remarkable thing about public humiliation. The people who witness it often move on within minutes. The person living through it remembers every second for years. My attention shifted toward Ethan as he confidently joined a group of investors near the auction stage. He laughed easily. He shook hands. He accepted compliments about a recent development project in Boston. Not a single expression on his face suggested he regretted what he had just done. One of the foundation organizers approached me with a welcoming smile. "Mr. Blackwood, we are honored you could attend tonight." I thanked her politely before asking a simple question. The young woman helping with guest services. "Claire Bennett. Has she worked with the foundation for long?" The organizer smiled warmly. "Almost a year. She is one of the first people to volunteer whenever we host an event." "Employee?" I asked. "Freelance hospitality coordinator. She lost her corporate position after downsizing last year, but she never stopped helping us. Honestly, she probably volunteers more hours than some full-time staff." I glanced across the ballroom again. Claire was helping a little boy straighten the collar of his jacket before guiding him back to his parents. The child smiled. She smiled back with genuine warmth. No audience. No performance. Just kindness. "And Ethan Carter?" I asked quietly. The organizer hesitated for a brief moment. "They used to date." She lowered her voice. "It ended several months ago. We try to keep things professional whenever they both attend, but sometimes—" She stopped before finishing the sentence. She did not need to. I had already witnessed the rest. A bell chimed softly through the ballroom, signaling that the charity auction would begin in a few minutes. Guests slowly made their way toward round tables facing the stage. Large display screens illuminated the room with images of artwork, travel experiences, and rare collectibles donated to raise money for the Children's Center. I walked toward my assigned seat near the front without taking my eyes off Claire. She continued directing guests with quiet confidence, completely unaware that she had become the only person in the room who held my attention. As she passed my table, an older gentleman accidentally dropped his program onto the floor. Claire immediately picked it up, smiled, and wished him a wonderful evening. He thanked her without realizing he had interrupted her own work. She simply nodded and continued walking. There was no frustration, no complaint, only grace. My mother once told me that the easiest way to judge a person's heart was to watch how they treated people who could offer them nothing in return. Tonight, I discovered another truth. Sometimes the strongest heart belongs to the person everyone else has decided is easy to overlook. I looked toward the stage as the auctioneer adjusted the microphone, but my thoughts remained fixed on the quiet young woman moving through the ballroom. Ethan believed he had measured her value with a single cruel sentence. Before the first item even appeared under the spotlight, I had already begun wondering what respect was truly worth. Money has never impressed me. The reason behind it always has. The auctioneer welcomed everyone with practiced enthusiasm as the ballroom lights softened and the first display illuminated the large screens surrounding the stage. One by one, luxury vacation packages, signed memorabilia, and original paintings were introduced to generous applause. Every winning bid was followed by polite smiles, raised glasses, and another promise to support the foundation. The room celebrated generosity, but beneath every conversation I could still hear the echo of Ethan's voice. Worthless. It was remarkable how one careless word could linger longer than an entire evening of carefully rehearsed speeches. I remained seated near the front, studying the crowd instead of the stage. Across the ballroom, Claire quietly moved between tables, refilling water glasses and collecting empty plates. She congratulated winning bidders with the same sincere smile she offered every guest. She never once looked toward Ethan. She never searched for sympathy. She simply continued serving others with a grace that made the expensive surroundings seem strangely unimportant. My attention shifted as the auctioneer introduced the featured item of the evening. An original landscape painting donated by a respected New York artist appeared beneath a spotlight. The auctioneer explained that every dollar raised from this single piece would fund new classrooms and after-school programs for underserved children across the city. Applause filled the ballroom. The opening bid began at $100,000. Several hands immediately rose. The number climbed with effortless confidence. 150,000, 200,000, 300,000. Wealth often moved faster when everyone else was watching. I joined the bidding without emotion. For 100,000. Another bidder answered with 500,000. Across the room, Ethan casually lifted his paddle and smiled towards several investors seated beside him. 600,000, he announced confidently. The auctioneer nodded with excitement. More applause followed. Ethan leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention. As another bidder hesitated, Ethan laughed quietly before speaking loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. At least this painting has real value. A few people smiled awkwardly. Others pretended not to notice the obvious reference. Claire happened to pass behind his table carrying a tray of coffee cups. She heard every word. Her steps slowed for only a fraction of a second before she continued walking without looking in his direction. That tiny moment told me everything. She had become accustomed to surviving insults that should never have been spoken in the first place. The auctioneer called for $700,000. Silence settled across the ballroom. Several bidders lowered their paddles. The excitement began fading as people reached their personal limits. Ethan glanced around the room with quiet satisfaction, believing the competition had ended. I looked toward Claire once more. She was helping an elderly woman adjust her chair before thanking her with the same gentle smile she had worn all evening. She expected nothing from anyone. Not recognition. Not rescue. Certainly not revenge. My decision had nothing to do with proving a point to Ethan. It had everything to do with refusing to let his voice become the final measure of another human being. I slowly lifted my paddle. $2 million. Every conversation stopped. The auctioneer stared at me in stunned silence. Crystal glasses froze halfway to waiting lips. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. The number hung in the air like thunder before rain. Ethan turned toward me so quickly that disbelief replaced every trace of confidence on his face. Claire looked up from across the ballroom, confusion filling her blue eyes as our gazes briefly met. I offered no explanation. I did not look at Ethan. I did not acknowledge the whispers spreading from table to table. I simply lowered my paddle and waited. Sometimes the loudest statement a man can make is the one he never speaks aloud. Respect is never purchased with money. It is earned by what a person chooses to do after everyone else is watching. The silence following my bid lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Then the ballroom erupted into applause. The auctioneer recovered first, thanking me with visible excitement before bringing down the wooden gavel. The painting was officially sold. $2 million. Every dollar would go toward expanding classrooms, scholarships, and after-school programs for children who had never asked to be born into difficult circumstances. That was reason enough for me. Everything else was simply noise. As conversations slowly returned, I noticed dozens of curious eyes following me across the room. Some admired the donation. Others tried to understand the reason behind it. People have always been uncomfortable when an action cannot be explained by profit, publicity, or personal gain. They searched for hidden motives because simple decency often seemed too difficult to believe. I signed the donation documents in a quiet corner beside the stage, while members of the foundation thanked me repeatedly. One board member suggested arranging a press interview before the evening ended. Another proposed a photograph with the painting for local newspapers. I politely declined every request. Tonight belongs to the children, I said. Not to me. They respected the decision without further discussion. After completing the paperwork, I stepped away from the growing crowd and headed toward the service hallway leading to the ballroom kitchen. The noise of the gala faded behind the heavy doors, replaced by the quieter rhythm of staff members preparing desserts and organizing equipment for the evening's final reception. Claire stood near a stainless steel counter, arranging trays of coffee cups for the remaining guests. For the first time that evening, she appeared completely alone. She looked tired, but not defeated. There is a difference. She noticed my reflection in the polished metal before turning toward me. Surprise crossed her face for only a moment before she offered the same calm smile she had given everyone else. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," she said politely. "Congratulations on your winning bid." "Thank you," I replied. "You have been working nonstop since I arrived." She glanced toward the ballroom entrance. "There are still guests who need coffee." You never stopped smiling. She looked down briefly before answering. "The children deserve a successful fundraiser. My personal feelings are not the important part of tonight." I studied her expression. There was honesty in every word. Not performance. Not self-pity. Simply honesty. "I do not believe your kindness is a weakness," I said quietly. "Neither should anyone else." For a brief second, the confidence she had carried all evening softened. It was almost invisible, but I saw it. Before she could answer, the kitchen doors opened again. Ethan walked inside carrying the effortless confidence he had worn throughout the gala, although now it seemed forced around the edges. His smile widened the moment he recognized me. "Mr. Blackwood," he said enthusiastically, extending his hand. "I wanted to introduce myself. I have admired your business achievements for years. Perhaps sometime we could discuss potential investment opportunities." I looked at his outstretched hand, but made no effort to take it. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. Ethan slowly lowered his arm, clearly uncertain how to recover. I met his eyes without raising my voice. A man usually reveals more about himself by the way he speaks to someone who can offer him nothing than by the way he speaks to someone he hopes will give him everything. No one moved. The kitchen seemed strangely quiet despite the steady sounds of dishes and footsteps around us. Ethan searched for an answer, but found none. He nodded awkwardly before excusing himself and walking back toward the ballroom. Claire watched him leave before turning toward me again. She did not thank me. She did not praise what I had said. She simply looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. It was not admiration. It was relief. For the first time that evening, someone had reminded her that dignity does not need to shout in order to be heard. The people who leave the deepest mark on your life are usually the ones who never realized they changed it. I left the service hallway believing our conversation had ended, but before I reached the main entrance to the ballroom, I heard light footsteps behind me. "Mr. Blackwood." I turned to find Claire standing a few feet away, still wearing the same simple black uniform she had worn all evening. A loose strand of blonde hair had escaped from behind her ear, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked uncertain about what she wanted to say. "I hope I am not interrupting you," she said. "Not at all." She took a slow breath before continuing. "I wanted to thank you." I studied her expression. "For the donation?" She shook her head gently. "The children will certainly benefit from that, but that is not why I came." She looked toward the ballroom, where the applause and conversations continued beyond the closed doors. "You did not have to say anything to Ethan." "No," I replied quietly. "I did not. Most people pretend they do not hear things like that." There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet honesty. "It is easier that way." "Does it happen often?" I asked. She smiled, though the smile carried more acceptance than happiness. "Not every day, just enough that I learned not to expect anyone to notice." Her answer settled heavily in the silence between us. I had spent years surrounded by people who measured influence in numbers, properties, and financial statements. Yet standing there beside a hallway lined with stainless steel carts and neatly stacked serving trays, I realized there was another kind of wealth. The ability to remain kind after disappointment. The ability to protect your character when someone else tries to diminish it. Those qualities could never appear on a balance sheet. Claire looked at me again. "May I tell you something?" I nodded. "When Ethan spoke tonight, I thought about defending myself." She glanced briefly toward the floor. Then I realized I would only be trying to convince someone who had already decided not to listen. I remained silent. She continued softly. "Some people spend so much time trying to prove another person has no value that they forget what it costs them to become that kind of person." Those words stayed with me, not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. She had every reason to be angry, yet she spoke with compassion instead of resentment. "You are different from what people say," she added after a moment. I smiled faintly. "People say many things." "They do." She laughed quietly. "Tonight I saw someone who could have embarrassed another person in front of an entire ballroom and chose not to." I looked toward the closed doors. Humiliation rarely teaches the lesson people think it does. She nodded in agreement. "Exactly." Before either of us spoke again, One of the foundation coordinators appeared from the ballroom. "Claire, we need help setting up the dessert tables." "I will be right there," she answered. The coordinator disappeared, leaving us alone once more. Claire offered a grateful smile before stepping backward. "Thank you again, Mr. Blackwood." "For what?" I asked. She hesitated just long enough for her answer to matter. "For reminding me that one cruel voice does not have to become the loudest one." She returned to the ballroom without waiting for another reply. I watched the doors close behind her before walking toward the hotel entrance where my driver waited outside beneath the glowing lights of Fifth Avenue. The city looked exactly as it had when I arrived, yet something inside me had shifted. Before opening the car door, I called my attorney. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "I want you to gather only publicly available information about Claire Bennett. Nothing private, nothing invasive." There was a brief pause before he answered. "May I ask why?" I looked back at the hotel one last time. "Because I have a feeling tonight was only the beginning of a story neither of us expected to live." The people who change your future rarely do it by asking for your attention. They do it by quietly changing the questions you begin asking yourself. The following morning, my attorney arrived at my office overlooking Midtown Manhattan, carrying a thin folder instead of the thick reports I normally expected. He placed it on my desk without speaking. "Everything inside is public information," he said, "just as you requested." I opened the folder slowly. Claire Bennett, 26 years old, born in Burlington, Vermont. Degree in hospitality management. Former guest relations supervisor for a hotel group that eliminated hundreds of positions during a company restructuring. Since then, she had accepted freelance event work while volunteering at several nonprofit organizations across New York City. There were no scandals, no lawsuits, no hidden financial disasters. Just a list of employers who described her with nearly identical words. Dependable, professional, compassionate. One handwritten recommendation caught my attention more than the others. It simply read, "She always makes difficult days easier for everyone around her." I closed the folder for a moment. In my world, people usually built reputations by proving how powerful they were. Claire had somehow built hers by making life better for complete strangers. "Anything else?" I asked. My attorney hesitated. "One detail." I looked up. "Ethan Carter has attended several charity events where she also volunteered. According to public witnesses quoted in one local article, he has embarrassed her before." I remained silent. Nobody intervened. Those 3 words lingered in the room long after he finished speaking. Nobody intervened. Sometimes silence protects wisdom. Other times it protects cowardice. I thanked my attorney before asking him to leave the folder on my desk. Once the office door closed, I stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below. Thousands of people hurried along sidewalks without realizing how many invisible battles surrounded them every day. I thought about Claire carrying trays through the ballroom after hearing words that would have broken many people. I thought about her thanking me instead of asking for help. Most of all, I thought about the children who would eventually walk through the classrooms funded by that auction. Suddenly, the 2 stories no longer felt separate. That afternoon, I called the executive director of the foundation. "I would like to discuss something beyond the donation," I said. We met 2 days later inside the foundation's modest office in Brooklyn. The walls were covered with photographs of smiling children holding books, graduation certificates, and handmade artwork. There were no expensive decorations, only evidence that ordinary kindness could create extraordinary results. The executive director greeted me warmly before explaining future plans for expanding after-school tutoring, mentoring programs, and family support services. I listened carefully before speaking. "The building is important," I said, "but buildings alone do not change lives." She nodded. "I agree. People do." I committed additional long-term funding, not for publicity, but to support teachers, counselors, volunteers, and educational programs that would continue long after construction ended. Relief filled her face. "This will change hundreds of lives," she whispered. As I prepared to leave, I noticed volunteers carrying donated supplies through the hallway toward a storage room. Among them was Claire. She balanced 2 heavy boxes in her arms while encouraging a teenage volunteer who looked exhausted after a long afternoon of work. She smiled at him, thanked him for giving up his Saturday, and carried her own boxes without asking anyone to take them. She still had no idea I was standing only a few yards away. Watching her from that quiet hallway, I finally understood something that money had never managed to teach me. The strongest foundations are never built with concrete first. They are built by people whose character remains steady even when nobody is watching. The greatest test of a person's character is not how they behave when someone important is watching. It is how they treat people who will never be able to repay them. I remained where I was until the last volunteer disappeared into the storage room. Claire finally noticed me only after setting the boxes onto a metal shelf. Surprise crossed her face before she walked over with the same quiet smile I had already begun to recognize. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I did not realize you were here today." "Neither did I answered with a faint smile. She laughed softly. "That sounds mysterious. It was not part of my schedule." She glanced toward the office where the executive director was speaking with several volunteers. "Then I suppose we both ended up here for the same reason." "Helping?" I asked. She nodded. "Sometimes people need money. Sometimes they need time. The fortunate ones can give both." Her answer lingered with me as we slowly walked down the hallway together. Children filled a nearby classroom with laughter, while volunteers unpacked books, art supplies, and donated backpacks. The sound echoed through the building with an honesty that no luxury ballroom could ever match. Claire stopped beside an open doorway where several elementary school students were drawing pictures with colored pencils. One little girl waved excitedly the moment she saw Claire. "Miss Claire, look what I made." Claire stepped inside without hesitation and admired the drawing as though it belonged in a museum. "That is beautiful," she said sincerely. "I love the colors you chose." The little girl's smile grew even wider. I remained outside the doorway watching the exchange. Claire never rushed children. She never spoke down to them. She gave each conversation her complete attention, as though nothing else in the world mattered for those few moments. After several minutes, we continued walking toward the front entrance. "You come here often," I observed. "Almost every weekend when I am free," she replied. "These children deserve adults who show up consistently." She looked out through the front windows where autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalk. Many promises disappear. Children remember the people who actually return. I thought about board meetings, acquisitions, and contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. None of them suddenly felt as significant as that simple sentence. Outside, a cool breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves through the Brooklyn streets. My driver waited beside the car, but I made no effort to leave. Claire stood beside the front steps, watching families arrive for the afternoon tutoring program. A young father carrying grocery bags struggled to hold the building's front door open while helping his son inside. Before anyone else reacted, Claire hurried forward, took several of the bags from his hands, and held the door with an easy smile. The father thanked her repeatedly. She simply wished them a wonderful afternoon before returning, as though she had done nothing unusual. "Does anyone ever help you?" I asked quietly. She looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Sometimes." "And when nobody does?" She shrugged gently. Then I remind myself that becoming bitter would only give difficult people another victory. I lowered my eyes for a brief moment. In every boardroom I had ever entered, strength meant controlling the conversation. Standing beside Claire, I began to understand that real strength sometimes meant refusing to let another person's cruelty decide who you became. As she prepared to return inside, I spoke before I could reconsider. "Claire," she turned, "would you have dinner with me sometime this week?" There was no grand gesture, no dramatic pause, only honest surprise filling her blue eyes. She studied me carefully before answering with the same sincerity she had carried from the first moment we met. "Only if it is just dinner," she said with a warm smile. "I have learned to be careful about people who try to rescue me." I smiled for the first time in what felt like years. "That is fortunate," I replied, "because I am not trying to rescue you. I am trying to get to know the woman who reminded me that kindness is still the rarest form of courage. The easiest promises to make are the ones that cost nothing. The hardest ones are spoken quietly, without witnesses, because they ask something from your own heart first." Our dinner took place 3 evenings later in a small restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. I deliberately chose a place with no photographers, no private dining room, and no orchestra trying to impress wealthy guests. I wanted ordinary conversation. Claire arrived exactly on time, wearing a simple navy blue dress that reflected the evening sky outside the windows. She smiled as she approached the table, and for the first time since we met, she looked completely relaxed. Thank you for choosing somewhere that feels real, she said after sitting down. I have attended enough extravagant events to appreciate normal. I smiled. So have I. The waiter poured water before leaving us with menus neither of us opened immediately. The silence between us did not feel uncomfortable. It felt honest. May I ask you something? Claire said. Of course. Why did you really invite me? She asked the question without suspicion. She simply wanted the truth. I looked out toward the river where lights shimmered across the water before answering. Because everyone else seemed interested in your circumstances. I became interested in your character. She lowered her eyes for a brief moment before laughing softly. That is probably the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. It is also the truth. Dinner unfolded without discussing business, money, or the headlines that usually followed my name. We spoke about Vermont, where she learned to appreciate quiet mornings. I told her about growing up in a neighborhood where silence often meant people were hiding pain instead of enjoying peace. She described volunteering because someone had once helped her family during difficult years without asking for recognition. I admitted that success had introduced me to many impressive people, but very few genuine ones. Every answer she gave revealed another layer of quiet strength. She never exaggerated her hardships. She never tried to inspire sympathy. She simply described life with gratitude that refused to disappear even after disappointment. As dessert arrived, she smiled thoughtfully. May I tell you something strange? Please. When I first learned your name, I was intimidated. I raised an eyebrow. Now, she looked directly into my eyes. Now I think you spend a great deal of energy convincing the world that nothing can hurt you. Her words landed with surprising accuracy. I had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without feeling exposed, yet one quiet observation from across the table left me speechless. Am I wrong? She asked gently. I shook my head. No. She reached for her coffee cup, but did not look away. People who build very high walls usually learn that lesson somewhere. I smiled faintly. You notice too much. Occupational habit, she replied. Hospitality teaches you to pay attention to people who think nobody sees them. I realized then that she had been studying me as carefully as I had been studying her. Not to judge me, to understand me. When dinner ended, we walked along the river beneath rows of glowing streetlights. The cool evening air carried the scent of autumn and distant rain. We stopped near a bench overlooking the water where ferries crossed quietly through the darkness. This has been the nicest evening I have had in a very long time, Claire admitted. Me too. She laughed. I was expecting an impressive businessman. And instead I met a man who still remembers how to listen. Those words stayed with me long after we said goodnight. As my driver pulled away from the curb, I watched Claire disappear into the warm lights of the subway entrance with the same confidence she carried into every room. She did not leave with expensive gifts. She did not ask for promises about tomorrow. Yet somewhere between a simple dinner and an honest conversation, I realized that the woman everyone else underestimated had quietly begun changing the measure of the man I wanted to become. The heart rarely changes all at once. It changes one quiet conversation at a time until one morning you wake up and realize your old life no longer fits the person you are becoming. Over the following weeks, seeing Claire became the calmest part of my schedule. Some evenings we shared dinner at neighborhood restaurants where nobody cared who I was. Other afternoons we walked through Central Park with coffee in our hands, watching children chase pigeons across open paths while musicians filled the air with familiar melodies. She never asked about the size of my company or the value of my investments. Instead, she asked whether I ever took vacations, what books I enjoyed, and when I had last visited my mother. They were ordinary questions, yet I often struggled to answer them. My calendar had always been full. My life had not. Claire had a remarkable gift for exposing that difference without ever trying to. One Saturday morning, she invited me to help distribute school supplies at the community center before the new semester began. Volunteers formed long lines carrying backpacks filled with notebooks, pencils, calculators, and art supplies. Families waited patiently outside long before the doors opened. There were no cameras, no speeches, just neighbors helping neighbors. Claire handed me several boxes and smiled. Today you are not the donor. What am I? I asked. Volunteer number 27. I laughed more sincerely than I had in years. For the next several hours I carried cartons, organized tables, greeted parents, and listened as children excitedly compared the colors of their new backpacks. Nobody treated me differently because Claire never introduced me as anything other than Damien. It was strangely freeing. A little boy with oversized glasses tugged gently on my jacket while holding a backpack almost as large as he was. "Mister, can you help me zip this?" I knelt beside him and fixed the stubborn zipper before handing the bag back. "There you go." His smile could have illuminated the entire room. "Thank you." He ran toward his mother without another word. Claire had been watching from across the table where she was helping another family. When our eyes met, she smiled with quiet satisfaction. Not because I had done something extraordinary, but because I had finally experienced the kind of generosity that expected nothing in return. Later that afternoon, we sat together on the building's front steps, sharing sandwiches provided by another volunteer. "You fit in surprisingly well," Claire teased. "Do not tell my board of directors." She laughed. "Your secret is safe." The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of expensive shoes approaching across the sidewalk. I looked up and immediately recognized Ethan. He wore another tailored suit, carried an expensive phone in one hand, and looked completely out of place among folding tables, donated supplies, and neighborhood families. His eyes moved from Claire to me before settling into an uncomfortable smile. "Claire," he began carefully, "I was hoping we could talk." She stood slowly but remained composed. "About what?" He hesitated, clearly aware that I was standing only a few feet away. "I think we both said things we regret." Claire looked at him with surprising calm. "No, Ethan. You said things you chose to believe. There is a difference." He glanced toward me before forcing another smile. "I may have been unfair." Claire folded her hands gently in front of her. "You were honest about who you were. I simply needed time to believe you." There was no anger in her voice. No desire for revenge. Only quiet certainty. Ethan searched for another response, but found none. After a long silence, he nodded awkwardly and walked away without looking back. Claire watched him disappear down the sidewalk before releasing a slow breath. I expected relief. Instead, I saw peace. In that moment, I understood something I had spent decades misunderstanding. The greatest victory is not watching someone who hurt you walk away defeated. It is realizing they no longer have the power to define how you see yourself.